We are talking tonight about healing the father wound, adult children of narcissistic fathers. Okay, this is going to be such a good topic, you guys. Um, there are certain ways that narcissism presents in fathers that may commonly be a little bit different than how narcissism presents in mothers, which we talked about last week. Okay, so there are some very specific effects that come from being raised by a narcissistic father or even the absence of a father due to narcissism. Okay, so greetings, Zena Electra. Thank you for extending your greetings as you come into the room. Please say hello, you guys, as you come into the room so I know who's here. I really want you all to be a part of this conversation tonight, as always. Before we get into it, I do want to introduce myself for those who are new to the channel. I am Pangea Northstar. I am an empath, a Reiki healer, a sound therapist, a teacher, and on this channel, we are always talking about attracting love energy. That is the name of this segment that we do on Tuesday nights live. Attracting love energy. We're talking about how to attract love of all kinds into your life, okay, which will lead you to attracting the love and the life that you desire, okay? So, in doing so, we are utilizing the laws of attraction, okay, as well as we are discussing our chakras, the energy centers that are within our body, the types of trauma that those energy centers tend to hold, and what those things attract to us. So we always want to get around to talking about, hey, how do we clear those blockages? What chakras do we need to work on to clear these particular blockages? Okay. So go ahead and give us a like and a subscribe if you are interested in hearing more and participate in this conversation. So we're talking about tonight the father wound, right? What are the effects of being raised by or even the absence of a narcissistic father? Okay. So, greetings, Braylon. Thank you for coming into the room tonight and being a part of this conversation. So, narcissism is a very, very common condition that can present in many different ways. There are different types of narcissists, right? But there are some very common traits that are common to most narcissists. Okay, so we'll stick with the most common things in the way that they can present in fatherhood, just to keep things concise. There's lots of information out here. If you hear this and you're thinking, oh man, maybe that's what's going on with my dad. My dad is a narcissist. There's plenty of information on the net that you can look at to find out more about narcissism in general, okay? But let's get into this topic, y'all. So, with Father's Day coming up, many people may be feeling a little bit triggered at being expected to celebrate a father who has narcissistic tendencies. Okay. We're expected to celebrate our father if the father is just present, right? If the father is just present, period. We're expected to celebrate them for Father's Day. Unfortunately, because of the huge problem of fatherlessness, some people may look at you like, well, at least you have a dad, and just assume that that's a great thing. But if your father is a narcissist, this can be a huge source of internal conflict, to say the least, for you. If you were raised by a narcissistic father, and this conflict, this trauma can extend well into adulthood, and it is something that must be addressed directly. If not, this is going to follow you in terms of how you feel about yourself and how you operate in relationships. Okay, so let's get into it. The The role of fatherhood is associated with protecting, right? Protection and provision, okay? But what if your father is present, but he never affirmed you? He never saw you. He never made you feel safe physically, emotionally, financially, right? This is very, very common. Greetings, Deb Dearman. Greetings. So glad you're here. So, if your father is physically present, like I said, many will tell you you're lucky just to have a dad, right? But what if your father was physically present but emotionally absent? What if your father was physically present but emotionally abusive? What if your father was physically present but physically abusive, or physically present but financially irresponsible? Okay. All of these things are super common with narcissistic fathers. Okay. So healing the father wound, um, this father wound takes a particular shape when the wounding is caused by narcissism. Okay. Narcissists are people who have chosen control over love. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Narcissists are people who have chosen control over love. Okay, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Greetings, Elmira. Okay, so I'm sorry to hear that. Deb says I've had one of those people who went on drugs once and it was still and is still on it. I'm so sorry to hear that. My mom is on drugs and my dad is on drugs, and maybe everyone who abandoned me is on drugs. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry to hear that, Deb. I'm really sorry to hear that, and my heart really goes out to you. I pray that you get something meaningful out of this conversation as we get into it. And I think one of the main things in healing from having a narcissistic parent is understanding that it was not about you. Their abandonment, their rejection, their abuse is not about you. It's about them and the insecurities they have within themselves, the unhealed trauma within themselves, okay, that ends up getting getting pushed off on you and resulting in you being neglected, resulting in you being controlled, right? And when our parents don't step into that parent role and don't nurture us or show love in ways that resonate with us, it's easy for us to feel unlovable, right? It's easy for us to feel that we're not worthy of love. But once we come to understand that it was always about them and the way that they see themselves and the things that they, lash out at us the most about are the parts of us that remind them of themselves and remind them of that vulnerable child within them that may not have been nurtured, may have not been cared for, and is traumatized. Okay, so I want to say I'm thankful that you brought this up, because um, it's important to know that narcissists are created oftentimes, most often, by childhood trauma. When something happens within childhood that leaves the child feeling unsafe, feeling that they're in a predatory environment, often they become predatory themselves and kind of subconsciously decide that, hey, I'd rather be the predator than the victim. I'd rather be the controller than the controlled. Okay. So, again, narcissists are people who have decided, they have chosen control instead of love. So this includes control over their environment, control of the way people view them, controlling their life circumstances at any cost. Thank you for your subscription, Deb. As an adult child of a narcissistic father, you will be controlled in every aspect of your life and every aspect that can possibly control you. Okay. You will be expected to fall in line with whatever controlled setup the father has going on in his life now. You're expected to fall in line just as if you're still a child. Okay. So, um, you're expected to never really fully come into your own as an adult. So the treatment that you will receive is the same treatment that you received as that child who was being controlled. Okay. So when I talk about, being expected to fall in line with the control, whatever controlled setup the father has currently in his life, even when you're an adult, this could be, you know, a controlled environment within the home. It could even be very common scenario is like a controlled environment within a family business. Imagine being in a family business with your narcissistic father, right? The father is going to always be the boss and is never really preparing you to step into leadership and take over the family business or even have any leadership role within the family because they're never planning to relinquish that control. They are planning to always be at the helm. And the older you get, and the more you can be perceived as a threat to that control, to that image as the leader that the father has. Okay, so keep in mind, listen for the elements of control and everything that we're about to talk about. Okay. So you're expected to stay in line and never express your emotions, never express your ideas, never express your individuality or anything that would outshine him as the authority figure. Okay. A trait that is more common to narcissistic fathers than narcissistic mothers is using money to control you. Okay. Narcissistic fathers will commonly, not that narcissistic mothers don't do this, but it's even more common in narcissistic fathers that they will use money as a way to control their adult children. They'll use, oh, well, I'm doing this for you financially, so you must be eternally grateful. You must, stay in line. You have to play this subservient role within the family. And if you don't do this, then I'm not going to keep giving you money. Once anything that this narcissistic father does for you, it comes with some strings. It comes with something behind it that you're supposed to stay in line and stay in your place in exchange for just receiving support, which is normal part of what parents do, even for adult children, right? But this is used as a means of control. And then not only will they give you money and expect you, to stay in your place as a result, but will also hold it over your head and shame you about it, as if you're never supposed to need any help. You're weak, you're a loser, or you're incompetent, you're unable to make decisions on your own, or you're blowing your life, simply because you may have needed some support. Okay. So I want you all to think about how much a narcissistic father may be supported in narcissistic actions by these false structures in our society that are set up to support toxic masculinity. Okay. And you guys, I want to say this is not, a beat up session, for men or for fathers. Just as much as last week, our conversation about narcissistic mothers, the purpose is not to beat up on women or on mothers, but to gain some understanding and to add some energetic support and some emotional support for adults who were raised by narcissistic parents. Okay. Deb, I'm reading your comments. I'm not going to share them all right now, but I'm so glad that you're sharing and that you're relating to this content. And I hope that you do have some questions when we get into our question and answer period. So the emotional abuse of a narcissistic father is often masked or excused as just being a man. Okay. And that is what one of the core things that separates the experience of having a narcissistic father from having a narcissistic mother. Okay. Um, the role of provider and the role of being protector as a masculine figure is often confused for being this stoic character, being this heroic character, being this grandiose character that is absolutely not expected to be nurturing. Okay. When in reality, a balanced father, a divine masculine, right? A supportive father is nurturing. A supportive father is able to hear their children's emotions, able to comfort their children in their emotions, able to help teach a child how to regulate their own emotions, as well as, giving advice, giving guidance, right? But a narcissistic father is very much emotionally distant and very much self-involved. Okay. So as the provider for a family, a father can easily use the excuse of, I have to work, I can't be there for this game or this activity or to help with homework or to spend quality time on the weekends because I have to work. And that is an easy out, right? That's a common excuse for not being emotionally present, though a father may be physically present. Okay. So this emotional distance that is often excused as just being a man also can come with bullying, can come with dismissal of emotions that are expressed, right? This can come with bullying male children into suppressing their emotions. And how many of us have ever experienced this or witnessed this, where a father is saying to the son, "Oh, stop crying. You're acting like a girl, right? You're weak. You're being too soft, right?" These are toxic messages that men receive from very, very young. Okay. If you've ever had these things said to you as a man or witnessed these things being said to men or to young boys, give me some fire in the chat. Okay. Yes, I see you all confirming that. But that is very, very common, right? And only in very recent years have we begun to make room for men to have emotions, right? We've only in recent years really widely began to challenge men to be nurturers of others' emotions, right? So the challenge with this is twofold. It's twofold. And the thing is that when this happens to a young boy, he is being given a definition of manhood and masculinity that is completely divorced from who he really is inside. Young boys don't they're not born devoid of emotions. Young boys are separated from their emotions in early childhood, okay? Because we live in a society that largely does not make room for, does not even have sufficient language for male emotions, okay? So, more than likely, these narcissistic fathers had this done to them as well, okay? And it may be that perhaps they were raised in like a volatile home, or had a violent experience happen, or some experience that made them feel that they weren't in control of themselves, that they weren't safe. Or it could also just be being told that there was no room for them to have emotions, and that they must keep this hard shell, this hard exterior, and hide their fears, hide disappointments, um, to hide any emotions that show vulnerability. So this produces men who in adulthood often develop very strong narcissistic tendencies in order to make themselves feel safe, in order to measure up to these toxic masculine ideals of manhood. Okay. And if you're a woman, listen to this. I want to challenge you to hang in here. Do not tune out. Okay. Even though we're talking a lot about, the effects on men, we're also going to talk about the effects on women, because this is very important to us, especially if you are dating men, married to a man, raising young men, if you have brothers or male friends in your life that you support emotionally. We need to consider the effects on men when they are told that they should not have emotions, let alone express emotions, right? And toxic fathers can play a huge role in proliferating that idea, that's very pervasive in our society. Okay. Now, um, men raised by this type of father tend to feel pressure to match up to that grandiose, heroic image of his father, even if this does not feel true to who they are inside. Men raised by this type of father are often encouraged to be as domineering and insensitive as their father, and are rewarded um, by society, and even in the workplace, in top-down leadership positions. Okay, men are often bullied into developing this cold exterior, as they are told, they are weak or feminine by this overbearing father. Okay, they this emotional prison is created for them, and they're encouraged to become their own the guard of that emotional prison, and told that this is the definition of manhood. Let's check in with some of these comments. Zena is saying emotions is a part of the human experience. Yes, it's sad they feel as if they can't feel. Absolutely, absolutely. Experiencing your emotions is part of being fully human. Okay. All right. And Deb says, at 10 years old, my dad went on drugs and abused me, and he left, and I'm still, oh goodness, this is so sad. I'm so sorry to hear that. And I see that you're saying, yes, you're a young male as well. And I'm glad that you are interested in this type of content, so that you can begin to start to find some healing for yourself. So men who otherwise would be caring and sensitive are told they are weak or feminine by the overbearing father. They're made to feel that they must hide these qualities about themselves to be perceived as masculine. Okay. Um, they may go through life pretending to be someone that they are not because they are chastised for expressing their emotions and never learn to openly communicate how they feel without being told that they're being quote unquote too soft. Okay. And I've had many opportunities to talk to many men in my line of work as an energy healer, and it's all too common that I hear that as young boys, men were told that they were soft, even if they just had interest in like the arts, or music or dance, something that required them to tap more into their creativity rather than like working with their hands, or like shamed if they didn't want to play football, if they didn't want to wrestle, if they, didn't want to be boxers, or, things that were outwardly physically aggressive, you know? Yes, Myers, that they are told this as boys. Absolutely, absolutely. There's this very narrow definition of what manhood looks like, right? And then to add to the confusion, much of society is confirming this for them as they go throughout their lives. They're looking around and seeing other men struggling to fit into this very narrow box, this man box. Okay. And this is why I believe this is why most of your violent crimes are committed by men in our society, because they are so emotionally repressed. So much pressure, to be a certain way that does not allow for expression. Like, how do you process your emotions when you're told you're not supposed to have any emotions? I can only imagine how much pressure that is. Yes, Deb said this is my first time being able to express myself like this for a long time. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's not enough space for men to express their emotions. So men, it's up to men to create spaces to express their emotions and create environments within their own lives through their friends and their family that are supportive of their emotions and that give them the opportunity to express how they feel, right? So as you begin to heal, these traumas from being neglected in childhood or being pushed into being a certain way, it's important to make friends with and connect with people that will support you in expressing your emotions. So now, let's talk about how this looks in adulthood. Okay, when you've been raised by a narcissistic father, and we're going to talk about how this affects men and how this affects women and everybody in between. Okay, so effects in adulthood. One effect that I want to talk about is ambiguous loss. Okay, ambiguous loss. What does that mean? Ambiguous loss is when you feel the absence of something or the loss of something that is actually physically present. Okay, physically present, or if the loss is not completely understood, explained, or resolved. And I'll give some examples. Okay, this ambiguous loss in general is something that often happens in a situation where, say, a good example is if, we'll keep this in the context of fatherhood, if your father went to prison. Okay, that's an example, one of the extreme examples. If your father went to prison, right, and you know where your father is, you may even have contact with your father still, but you're still suffering the loss, even though they are a part of your life in some way and you're in contact with them. There's still the loss even though you have a father, you're still experiencing the loss of your father, right? Another example could be if your father was deployed in the military, right? So if your father were deployed in the military, your father is gone, even though they're still a part of your life and you still have a father, there's this loss that's really difficult to wrap your mind around. Okay. Like, I still have a father. I know my father, but they're not present. So, narcissism in a father also can create the feeling of ambiguous loss because your father may be right there in the household or somewhere in your life, even if they don't live in the household, they're there, but they're not fulfilling the role of a father. Okay. Um, they are either, they can be anywhere from totally neglectful and very like emotionally absent, or they can be present but playing a very antagonistic role in your life. Okay, shaming you, bullying you, being overly sarcastic, dominating the environment in the household so that there aren't any rooms there's no room for anyone else's emotions or opinions other than his. Okay, that's still an ambiguous loss because it's like, okay, I see this person physically here, but this role that I would expect or need to be fulfilled in my life by having a father is not being fulfilled. Okay, another phenomenon that can be experienced is a form of cognitive dissonance. Okay, because there's this environment set in the household that, okay, I have to live up to this narcissistic father's expectations of who I'm supposed to be, and they're often comparing you to them and expecting you to measure up to who they um, purport to be, right? To who they represent themselves to be, because they're often, being very grandiose and painting this very heroic picture of themselves and referring to themselves, as this self-made man or someone who can do no wrong. But in reality, that's not the version that you're experiencing. They're not a hero in your eyes. They're not self-made in your eyes because you see the real them. So there's this cognitive dissonance that it's like, okay, I'm being expected to behave in this manner, but that's not really true to who I am. I have to pretend to respect this person, right? I have to pretend, I'm expected to pretend that this person was this great father throughout my childhood, but yet, I never felt nurtured or protected or, provided for. I didn't feel the impact of actually having a father in my life, right? That's often what the adult child of a narcissistic father is thinking. It's like, okay, I'm supposed to give you all this, respect and all these kudos for doing this bang up job of being a father when you were really just kind of there, you know? And my interactions with you were damaging, right? But they want all this respect and all these kudos as if they were the world's best dad. Okay. No, and there's no acknowledgement for the ways in which they may have neglected you, abused you, harmed you emotionally, physically, or however. There's never an acknowledgement of that because that's also part of narcissism, that they're never accountable for their actions. Okay. So if this makes sense, give me some fire in the chat if this makes sense, okay? And you guys, as you kind of listen to this, just ask yourself, okay, is this how my father was? Is this how my father still is? Right? A real narcissist will never budge an inch on any of this, okay? A true narcissist will never acknowledge that they've done any wrong, okay? Whereas someone who just has strong narcissistic tendencies, they may, at some point in life begin to kind of open up and kind of see some of the error of their ways and start trying to correct some of that. So there is a difference in having strong narcissistic tendencies and being a complete narcissist. Okay. So Soul dissonance. Soul dissonance. And I did cover this last week, but I'm going to briefly cover it again for those who may have missed it. Soul dissonance is when you're put in a situation that does not sit well with your soul. Okay, so many of us who are empaths, healers, star seeds, way showers are born into these families where our family members feel foreign. It's like, I know, obviously that I was born into this family, but none of us are on the same page. None of my family, is empaths. None of my family are also healers or star seeds. I don't feel, this deep connection. We don't have the same family values. These people seem totally foreign to me. I don't understand how they think. We just don't seem to have anything in common in terms of purpose in life. Okay. So, now we want to also go into how men are affected and how women are affected in the different ways. And if you have any questions forming in your mind, please ask your questions in the chat so that we can kind of, start getting those questions answered, because before you know it, we're going to be wrapping up here. But for men, this can lead to men searching throughout their lives for an example of manhood that feels right within their own soul, something that feels true to who they are inside, even though they had a father. Okay, so that phenomenon of men feeling lost about what it means to be a man, that can happen um, even if the father is present, because that is something that is often associated with fatherlessness. But in reality, this is something that can happen if the father is there, but not fulfilling the role of a father. If the father is there, but always bullying, always overbearing, always criticizing, always, shaming or bullying their son, then that son still does not, though they have a father, they haven't been fathered. Okay? If that makes sense to you, give me some fire in the chat if you've ever witnessed this or experienced this yourself. Okay? So that son is either, still looking for this example of manhood they can relate to, or they may begin to take on this same identity and be trying this on and trying to imitate what they saw growing up, even though this was damaging for them. They may take on that example and take that on as their own identity. Okay, so let's see here. Also, I want to go into this a bit. So, we've all heard this saying that nice guys finish last. Nice guys finish last. And oftentimes, this is talking about, in terms of career and success and stuff like that, but this can also be in relationships, okay? And there's a very specific reason why for this, okay? Many times, women who experience this model of fatherhood are mentally and emotionally conditioned to be attracted to this type of man in relationships. Why is that? A female child who grew up in the home with this type of father, this distant father, is conditioned to always be trying to get that father's attention, that father's approval, that father's acknowledgement, and will often take that same need for male approval and acknowledgement and connection into her adult relationships with men. Okay, if this is something that is not very intentionally addressed and healed, this can be taken into adult relationships. Okay, it's very, very common. And this woman is being, throughout her life, conditioned to be attracted to and to cater to this alpha male, this toxic form of masculinity. Okay, so throughout her life, she'll tend to, by her actions, right, by not having her own sense of self, but having grown into a people pleaser, as much as sons may do that as well, find themselves trying to please this narcissistic father. But when a woman does this, she becomes a people pleaser and takes that into relationships, then she's attracting the same type of male archetype into her life again and again and again. Even though this is subconscious, it's still a fact in her life because this is what I was raised with. This is my comfort zone. So it may take this bad guy type of character, this male bravado, to make her feel safe, to make her feel that, hey, this is a man that, has the leadership, quote unquote, leadership qualities that I've been looking for. So, this feels familiar, right? I said time and time again on this channel that even though home may have been dysfunctional, we tend to be drawn to, as we enter the world as adults, we tend to be drawn to things that feel like home. Greetings, Digimo. Greetings, Digimo from Brooklyn. Okay. So the woman tends to be drawn to guys that are like her father. And this is also just an interesting tidbit, you guys. I want to add this too. Even if your father was absent in your life, you will still be drawn to that type of man that is like your father, that has great similarities like your father. Why? Because that is half your DNA. Okay. And your subconscious mind knows what's missing and will go in search of that. Okay. Many times I've spoken to adult women who only began to find out about their father or get to know their own father later in life, later in their adulthood, and began to realize, oh my God, I've been attracted to men like this my entire life, even though they may not have been raised in the home with the father. So our subconscious mind is very strong, you guys. Carl Jung said that our subconscious mind will rule us and we will call it fate unless we begin to heal our traumas. Okay, I'm just summarizing that quote, but it's true. It can rule our entire life, and we will just think it's fate until we turn and face the patterns in our lives. So this is something that we really need to think about. Another thing that may play out in a woman's life who was raised in a home with a narcissistic father is being unprepared to hear men's emotions, being unprepared to contend with men's emotions, because that narcissistic father was not really expressing their true emotions. If they were expressing their emotions, they were expressing emotions in a way that was out of control, in a way that was overwhelming, maybe in a way that was scary or that was antagonizing, not in a way that you can really, sit and have a conversation with, right? Not in a way that teaches you to be able to hear and understand and respect male emotions. So what this does for a woman is puts her in a position where she's going into adult relationships with men, and is totally unprepared to hear a man express from the depths of his heart, from the depths of emotions, right? And if she was raised by this, ultra macho man that says, oh, men shouldn't have emotions and, men shouldn't cry or men, should not be vulnerable, she may view a man that really is good at expressing himself and that is expressing himself and that is able to express his vulnerability. She may see that man as being weak and will either reject that man. She may mock him for expressing his emotions and may reject him for expressing his emotions, or even use his emotions as a weapon against him. Okay, so to talk about, we're going to get into the energy of this, the chakras that are involved. Again, if you have questions, you can ask. Now's the time to submit your questions. So the chakra blockages involved here are quite extensive, okay? But we'll just get into some of it, all right? So because the father role is associated with protecting and providing, keeping you safe and providing for you, this, when you have a narcissistic father, this can easily cause root chakra injuries. Okay, the root chakra is associated with feelings of safety, with feelings of security. Okay, so this could be physical safety or even financial security, feelings of belonging. All of that is root chakra injury. Okay, the root chakra can also physically be where we hold childhood trauma, such as the inner thigh muscle, the iliopsoas, okay, is one of the places where the body holds childhood trauma. Okay, so root chakra is a big part of this. Okay, also, I would say your sacral chakra, because it can be difficult for you to connect to your own emotions, your own intuition. If you've been mocked for expressing your emotions or heeding your intuition, rather than like if you are in a situation with a narcissistic father and he expects you to just be, like military discipline and totally controlled by what he says and encourages you to go against your intuition, right? That would also be a sacral chakra injury. Okay, your solar plexus is involved. Okay, your solar plexus chakra, because a narcissistic parent, doesn't matter whether it's a father, mother, or whatever, really makes it difficult for you to be in touch with your own personal power. Really makes it difficult for you to develop a sense of self, any identity apart from them. Their identity is very dominant in the household, and they'll still continue to be very controlling and overbearing over you into your adulthood. So you may really feel like you don't have a sense of who you are. A narcissistic parent is not going to prepare you for making decisions for yourself in the world. They want to make all your decisions for you. So it's very difficult to have strong discernment and to be decisive and know how to make decisions for yourself when you've had a narcissistic parent. Okay, that's father or mother. Okay, heart chakra. You guys, it's very difficult to feel comfortable with loving someone or to be able to recognize pure and like safe, real love when this is who taught you love, a narcissistic parent, okay, whether it's father or mother. All right, throat chakra. Narcissists do not allow for others around them to have their true expression. Okay, especially if that expression disagrees with them or is in any way threatens their view of themselves. Okay, remember, narcissists are people who have chosen control over love. Okay, they'd rather have control of the people around them rather than love the people around them. Yep. So Deb is saying my dad used to make me go out and say that he was the most perfect man ever. Absolutely. That makes sense because narcissists want to look and appear to be this perfect parent in the eyes of everyone around them. Okay. Behind closed doors at home is totally different. Right. But to the general public, to people in the community, to people at church, to people at school, other people, maybe an extended family, they want to look like this champion parent. The narcissistic father wants to look like dad of the year, right? But in reality, they're not even acting like a parent at all. Okay. So, yes, your experience of them outside the home will be way different than your experience inside the home. Outside the home may be the only time that narcissistic father encourages you, compliments you, or, acts as though you have some type of connection. But at home, they're they're totally different. They may be putting you down, they may be bullying you, they may be abusive to you. Okay, so now third eye chakra and crown chakra, I'm just gonna kind of combine those two by making this statement. Because our father, and I'll say our mother as well, our parents, are our first representative of guidance, of what should be divine guidance, having a narcissistic parent can make it very difficult for you to trust or have a tendency to lean into your divine guidance. When you have had that role in your life to be abused, it can be very difficult to want to connect to your divine guidance. Okay. It's very, very traumatic and deeply impactful to your soul's journey. Okay. So some of us as empaths or star seeds, because of our mission here on earth, we may, have a tendency to kind of lean more into our divine guidance as an escape. If there's something in us that's saying, something's wrong with my parents, I'm not buying into the things that they're trying to convince me of. And you may tend to lean more into your divine guidance as comfort or for the guidance that you're not getting from your parents. But for some, you may really buy into and be swept away by trying to please your narcissistic parents. It can be quite difficult. It may be that, pleasing your parents is the way to psychologically or emotionally or maybe even physically survive, right? When you're coming up, when you're at a point when you're still being raised by them. So breaking out of that pattern and beginning to trust your own divine guidance can be quite difficult, especially if, nothing in your home environment is confirming, affirming, or encouraging you to lean into your divine guidance, to trust your gut feelings, to trust your intuition, right? So, yes, Zena Electra says materialism, absolutely. Believing that now there are different definitions of materialism. One is, placing, financial gain over everything. And the other one is that only the physical, tangible world is the only thing that's real. Okay, so if you're raised by a narcissistic father or even a narcissistic mother or both that says, hey, all that is, it's woo woo, this doesn't matter. Only what you can see, touch, and feel is real, and all that, spiritual crap, it doesn't matter. You're a dreamer. Stop dreaming. You're living in your head. you know Yes, we talked about that. Yes, Zena Electra says substituting love with stuff. Absolutely. We talked about that earlier, using money to control, giving gifts instead of giving connection, you know? So all of these things, can be very, very damaging and leave us very dysregulated. Okay. So if you find yourself, still struggling in your adulthood, in your adult relationships with others, or even your relationship with yourself due to injuries from narcissistic fathers, which, will use their children and other family members as narcissistic supply, who will energy vampire off of their children. If you still find yourself struggling with these things, I highly, highly recommend that you begin to explore energy healing. You know, um, Cognitive therapy can be very helpful. It can be very helpful to help you kind of sort out and understand the things that you're feeling. But please do not neglect your energy body. Okay. Do not neglect things like um, sound therapy, things like Reiki, things like meditation. Okay. And beginning to explore the energetic blockages that are still there. Because if you allow these energetic blockages to remain in your energetic field, then you're going to attract more and more of the same into your life. Greetings to Nurture. Thank you for joining us. You will continue to attract narcissistic friends, narcissistic partners. You'll find yourself even attracting narcissistic supervisors or bosses on your job. This will follow you throughout your life if you have been conditioned into the ways that narcissistic parents train you to be. Okay, because other narcissists, it's like the way a shark can smell blood in the water. Other narcissists can sense that they can dominate you and abuse you in the way that narcissists do. Okay, so thank you all so much for the support in the chat tonight. Thank you all so much for expressing yourselves and sharing your experiences and being a part of this conversation. I definitely invite you to come back again next week and be a part of the conversation. Okay, so thank you so much. As always, I love you all. I appreciate your support. And this is Pangea North Star signing off. Peace, love, magnets.